Silence is a source of great strength. My friends, let that sink in for a second. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's that calm decision to not say a word when everything inside you wants to scream. That's the kind of strength people don't expect, and that's why it hits the hardest. Now listen, today we're going to pull back the curtain on what really happens in someone's mind when your silence takes over. Because you may think they just move on, you may think they don't notice, but trust me, they notice. Silence is like a mirror that doesn't lie, and when you choose not to react, it reflects back something they can't escape. So stay with me, because what you're about to discover may just change the way you see yourself and your silence forever. And before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's keep building this stoic community together. Hey folks, imagine this. You walk into a crowded room, everyone's talking, laughing, making noise, and suddenly one person goes completely silent. No words, no reactions, just calm stillness. Who do people notice? Not the loud ones, it's the silent one. Because silence doesn't beg for attention, but somehow it commands it. That's the same thing happening when you pull back from someone who took your presence for granted. Your silence becomes louder than anything you could have said. See, we've been lied to, my friends. We've been told that if you care, you must chase. That if you want to be valued, you must constantly prove your worth. That silence equals weakness. But let me tell you, silence is not weakness. Silence is discipline. Silence is clarity. As Epictetus once said, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When you stop explaining, stop defending, and simply walk with calmness, people feel it. They can't ignore it. Think about the ocean. It doesn't announce its power every second. It doesn't explain its waves. But when it pulls back, when the tide goes quiet for a moment, everyone feels the shift. That's your silence. It unsettles them, not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, but because you've stepped into a kind of self-control they weren't prepared for. And trust me, folks, that's when the questions start echoing in their mind. Why isn't he reacting? Why didn't he fight? Has he really let go? And those questions, those little whispers, they get louder with every day you don't break your silence. Here's the funny thing, though. People will act like your silence doesn't bother them. They'll post, they'll laugh, they'll pretend they're unaffected. But deep down, silence has a way of creeping in during the quiet hours, when the noise fades and all they're left with is their own thoughts. It's like a song stuck in their head they can't turn off. And what's the song? It's your absence. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And my friends, that's exactly what silence does. You don't clap back, you don't beg, you don't explain. You simply rise above, and in doing so, you show that your peace is untouchable. That's when they realize they didn't just lose someone who cared. They lost someone who had the courage to walk away without a fight, without noise, without chaos. And that is unforgettable. So I want you to hear me clearly. Silence is not about running. It's not about giving up. It's about choosing peace over performance, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over impulse. It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't chase presence, but inspires it. And if you're sitting here wondering if silence really has that much power, my friend, I'll tell you this. Silence doesn't just close doors. Sometimes it builds whole new ones. And here's your reminder for today. You are stronger than you think. Your calm speaks louder than words. And your silence, when rooted in peace, is one of the most powerful tools you'll ever have. So write this down in the comments. My silence is my power. Let the world see it. Let yourself see it, and let them feel it. And if this message is hitting home for you, Smash that like button, subscribe for more, and stay with me, because what comes next will take this even deeper. 3 words, my friends. Silence is power. Number 1, the shock of stillness. When you react, they control you. When you stay silent, you control the game. My friends, let that one settle. Because silence isn't just a pause, it's a shift in power. It's the moment when the usual script gets torn apart, when the expected chaos never comes, and suddenly they're left staring at a version of you they can't predict. And that unpredictability, that stillness, that refusal to dance to the same old rhythm, that's what drives them crazy. Picture this. They expected fireworks, arguments, endless texts. They braced themselves for the same noise that always followed distance, but instead, nothing, just silence. No calls, no explanations, no chasing. It's like walking into a room that's always been filled with noise and suddenly hearing nothing but your own heartbeat. At first, it feels like relief, but then it gets eerie. It gets uncomfortable. Because the silence doesn't fade, it grows louder, and that's what happened in their mind. The questions began to echo. Why aren't you reacting? Did you stop caring? Have you really let go? And the more they asked themselves these questions, the less comfortable they became. See, people are used to drama. They're used to noise. They feed off of it because it reassures them. It tells them they still matter. But when you refuse to play that game, when you chose calm over chaos, you broke the illusion. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that's exactly what your silence embodied. You weren't ignoring them out of spite. You weren't playing games. You were showing them, without a word, that you had taken back control of the one thing they couldn't touch: your peace. Now, here's the hard truth, folks. They didn't expect that. They thought silence would mean weakness. They thought silence meant you had nothing to say, that you were crushed, that you were just waiting for them to notice you again. But instead, your silence flipped the script. You weren't waiting, you were walking. You weren't broken, you were building. And when they looked for the reaction that never came, the fear started to creep in. Imagine a stage actor waiting for applause after their big performance, and the crowd just sits in silence. No claps, no cheers, just stillness. How does that feel? Terrifying. Because it forces them to question themselves. Did they not matter? Did they lose their grip? Were they wrong about you? That's what your silence did. It turned their confidence into confusion, their certainty into doubt. But let's be honest here. It's not easy to stay silent. Every part of you wants to react, to prove a point, to explain why you deserve better. That's the human impulse. We crave closure. We crave to be understood. Yet the Stoics knew that chasing understanding from others is slavery. True freedom comes when you no longer need validation to know your worth. And that's why silence is so powerful. Because it's not passive, it's discipline. Think about it like a storm. Most people are like lightning, loud, flashy, unpredictable, desperate to be seen. But a Stoic man? He's like the mountain, silent, still, unmoved. And when the storm passes, the mountain remains. That's the metaphor they feel every time they look for your reaction and find nothing. You became the mountain. And in that stillness, you revealed their storm for what it really was, temporary noise. And here's where the fear starts. They wonder if they ever had real power over you. They wonder if the attention they once took for granted was never truly theirs to hold. Because your silence made them realize something no argument could ever prove. You are not dependent on them for peace. And my friends, that realization is like pulling oxygen out of a room. It leaves them gasping. But why do they fear it so much? Because silence strips away illusions. It forces people to face themselves, and when they don't hear from you, when you don't chase, they're left with their own thoughts. That's the hardest battle anyone can fight, the one with their own mind. And whether they admit it or not, your silence pushed them into that battle. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage," and in your case, even to stay silent was an act of courage, because you weren't just living without them, you were showing that you could thrive without needing to be heard, without needing to beg, without needing to prove anything. And that unsettled them in ways you can't imagine. So let's break the lies right here. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is not indifference. Silence is presence in a different form. It's the loudest statement you can make without saying a word. And when you carry it with calm, with discipline, with clarity, it shakes people to their core, because they can't manipulate what they can't provoke. And this is the point, folks, where you rise. This is the point where you stop chasing, stop begging, stop explaining. You realize that your silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. It's full of your self-respect, your standards, your decision to live in peace. And while they may sit in confusion, regret, and doubt, you're walking forward stronger, lighter, freer. So here's your affirmation for this moment. Write it in the comments, show it to yourself, show it to the world around you. I rise in silence. Because that's what you're doing. You're rising, not by noise, not by reaction, but by calm self-possession. And stay with me, because what comes next will reveal how that silence, your silence, doesn't just unsettle them, it transforms you, it rewrites the whole power dynamic, and that, my friends, is where the real shock begins. Number 2, the questions begin. Silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. My friends, think about that for a moment. Silence isn't nothing, it's everything they didn't want to hear. And when you gave them nothing, when you stayed calm instead of reacting, something started to shift inside their mind. At first, they brushed it off. He's probably busy. He'll text later. This won't last. But as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, the questions began to grow. And those questions, my friends, can be louder than any argument you could ever have. Imagine this. You've been driving down the same road every day, and suddenly, without warning, the road is closed. No explanation, no sign, just blocked. At first, you assume it's temporary. You'll wait. It'll open again. But as you sit there, as you keep checking, nothing changes. That's what your silence felt like. A road they once took for granted suddenly cut off. No detours, no shortcuts, just a hard stop. And in that stop, the questions started echoing. Why isn't he reacting? Did I misjudge him? Was I wrong about his feelings? Is he really done with me? Those whispers that started as curiosity quickly turned into restlessness. And restlessness, my friends, is the seed of regret, because the more they asked, the less they understood, and the less they understood, the more your silence grew heavy. Let me be clear. People expect resistance. They expect to see you fight for them. They want to see you panic, reach out, prove yourself. It feeds their ego. It tells them they still have control. But when you didn't give them that, when you didn't react, their certainty cracked. Your silence became a mirror, and that mirror forced them to face something they didn't want to admit. They weren't as powerful over you as they thought. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Your silence, my friends, became that very lesson. It wasn't your silence that hurt them, it was their own estimate of it, their own meaning. They thought your lack of reaction meant indifference, but the more they tried to convince themselves of that, the less it felt true. Because if you were indifferent, why did it sting so much? Why did the quiet feel heavier than words ever did? Now here's the irony. They thought they had you figured out. They thought you'd follow the same pattern you always had. Explain yourself, try to fix it, maybe even beg. And when that pattern broke, so did their confidence, because your silence wasn't just silence. It was discipline, it was control, and it reminded them of something they didn't want to face. You don't belong to their script. Think about the way water flows. If you try to grab it, it slips through your fingers. That's what your silence did. They tried to predict you, to box you in, to hold on to the version of you they thought they knew. But your stillness slipped away, and the harder they tried to explain it, the more questions they had. Did he ever really need me? Or was I just assuming he couldn't live without me? That question, once it takes root, doesn't go away easily. But don't get it twisted. This isn't easy for you either. Silence requires courage. It requires the strength to resist the urge to explain, to defend, to prove your side of the story. And that's where most people fail. They can't bear the weight of being misunderstood. But a stoic man knows being misunderstood is a small price to pay for peace. Because peace doesn't come from their understanding, it comes from your acceptance. And that's why your silence works. Because you weren't avoiding, you weren't running, you were simply choosing not to give your energy to chaos. You chose clarity over explanation. You chose dignity over desperation. And that, my friends, is why the questions in their mind got louder with each passing day. Now let's break the lie right here. They'll try to convince themselves, and maybe even others, that your silence means you don't care, that you're cold, that you've moved on too fast. But the truth is, your silence isn't about them at all. It's about you. It's about valuing yourself enough not to pour energy into what doesn't serve you. And deep down, they know that. That's why it burns. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And that's exactly what you did. You didn't need to post a long paragraph about growth. You didn't need to announce your healing journey. You embodied it by refusing to react, by stepping back with clarity. And when you did that, you forced them to see you in a new light, not as someone desperate to be understood, but as someone disciplined enough to let go. Now imagine them scrolling through their phone. They open the chat thread, expecting to see your name pop up. Nothing. They check your stories, expecting some hint of sadness, maybe even a song lyric aimed at them. Nothing. And in that nothing, the questions roar louder. Why isn't he reaching out? Has he already healed? Did I really matter as much as I thought? Those are not small questions. Those are the kind of questions that echo at night, when the noise fades and the silence gets heavy. And that's when curiosity begins to shift into fear. Because the one thing they thought they could count on, your reaction, is gone. And without it, they're left staring at the possibility they underestimated you. They thought they knew you, but your silence is revealing a version of you they've never seen before. Strong, disciplined, unpredictable. And unpredictability, my friends, is unforgettable. So let me tell you this, don't underestimate the power of your silence. Don't let anyone tell you it's weakness. It is the highest form of control. It's the refusal to let someone else dictate your peace. And while they may never admit it out loud, your silence is asking them questions they don't want to answer. Questions like, why didn't he fight for me? And more importantly, why was he willing to walk away? And that's your strength. Because you didn't beg, you didn't panic, you didn't fall into the script. You chose yourself, you chose your peace, you chose your dignity. And in doing so, you became unforgettable, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. So here's your affirmation for this section. Write it in the comments, let it echo in your own mind, let it be seen by others. I choose peace over reaction, because that's what you did. You chose silence not as surrender, but as strength, and the world, and they, felt it. Stay with me, because what comes next will show you how those questions, once they take root, don't just stir curiosity. They turn into something deeper: restlessness, regret, and the one realization they never wanted to face. And trust me, you'll want to hear that part. Number 3, ego meets the mirror. If you want to know a person's true character, give them silence instead of attention. My friends, silence is a strange teacher. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't try to prove anything. It simply reflects. And when you went quiet, when you stopped reacting, when you stopped feeding the endless cycle of noise, they were left staring into a mirror they didn't want to face. Because silence is a mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. Let's break this down. For the longest time, they drew their strength, their confidence, even their sense of control from your reactions. Your attention was their oxygen. Your explanations were their safety net. Even your frustration was proof that they mattered. But then one day, you cut the oxygen. You removed the safety net. You refused to play their game. And suddenly, the mirror showed them something raw, their ego, naked, unmasked, exposed. Imagine a performer stepping onto a stage expecting applause. They sing, they dance, they pour themselves into the performance, and when it's over, silence. No claps, no cheers, not even a whisper. That silence doesn't just sting, it dismantles the ego, because applause is validation. Without it, the performer is forced to ask, am I really as great as I thought? Or did I need the noise to feel valuable? That's exactly what your silence did to them. For the first time, they had to face the uncomfortable truth. Their worth wasn't tied to your reaction anymore. And that realization, folks, is terrifying, because most people don't want to see themselves without the reflection of others. They want the reassurance, the confirmation, the constant reminders that they're desired, valued, wanted. Your silence stripped all of that away. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And in your silence, their imagination went wild. They imagined scenarios, explanations, reasons for your calm. They pictured you moving on, smiling, living unbothered. And the more their imagination raced, the harder the mirror hit. Because the ego thrives on certainty, and silence gave them none. Here's where the lie gets broken. They thought ego was strength. They thought power came from being chased, from being needed, from being the center of attention. But your silence revealed the weakness underneath. Ego is fragile. It can't stand alone. It depends on others to hold it up. And when you stopped holding, it cracked. Think of it like this. When a child throws a tantrum, what do they want? A reaction. Any reaction. Anger, comfort, attention. It doesn't matter as long as they get a response. But when the parent stands calm, unshaken, silent, the tantrum loses its power. The child is forced to face themselves, to realize that noise won't always move the world. That's what happened here. They expected your tantrum of words, your storm of emotions, your desperate chase. Instead, you gave them stillness. And in that stillness, they saw their own immaturity reflected back. Now, let's not sugarcoat this. It was hard for you too. Because silence isn't just about them facing their ego. It's about you facing your own. Every part of you wanted to prove a point, to make them understand, to defend yourself. But the moment you resisted that urge, you became stronger than your own ego. And that's what separates you from the rest. Because most people lose themselves trying to win others back. You, instead, chose to win yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. And that's exactly the lesson your silence taught. You stopped trying to control them, and you mastered control over yourself. And the more control you showed, the less control they had. That's the paradox. They thought they lost power over you, but what really happened is they lost power over themselves. Because every time they checked their phone and didn't see your name, every time they scrolled and didn't find your story, every time they sat in the quiet and remembered your calm, they realized they weren't in control of their own mind anymore. But here's the deeper truth. Silence not only reflects their ego, it reveals their dependence. They start to wonder, did I need his reaction to feel important? Did I rely on his validation more than I admitted? And once those questions creep in, they don't go away, because silence forces honesty. And honesty, my friends, is what the ego fears the most. Think of a lake. When the water is restless, you can't see your reflection clearly. But when the water goes still, when silence settles in, you see yourself for what you are. That's the gift and the curse of silence. It forced them to see themselves without the ripples of your reactions. And many times, what they saw wasn't pretty. They saw fear. They saw insecurity. They saw weakness. All the things your noise used to cover up. But let me remind you of this. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't punishment. You weren't trying to hurt them. You were simply living out one of the greatest Stoic truths. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Your silence wasn't revenge, it was alignment. And when you live in alignment, others are forced to confront the misalignment in themselves. That's what shakes them to their core. So, why is this difficult for them? Because ego hates mystery. Ego wants to know. Ego craves clarity. Ego wants to feel safe by predicting what happens next. And your silence denied all of that. You became unpredictable. You became unreadable. You became the one thing they didn't expect, a question mark. And my friends, a question mark in someone's mind can be louder than 1,000 explanations. But here's the beauty. You didn't just give them a mirror, you gave yourself one too. In your silence, you saw your own strength. You saw your own ability to rise above, to detach with grace, to hold your peace even when everything inside you wanted to break it. And that's why silence is so powerful. Because it transforms not only how they see you, but how you see yourself. So let me speak directly to you now. If you're sitting in silence, wondering if it matters, wondering if it makes a difference, know this. Your silence is doing more than words ever could. It's breaking illusions, it's exposing ego, it's creating questions that echo in the quiet. And most importantly, it's reminding you of your own strength. And I want you to declare this today. Write it in the comments. Say it out loud. Show it to yourself and to the world. My silence breaks illusions. Because that's what you're doing. You're breaking the illusion that you need to chase. You're breaking the illusion that your worth is tied to noise. You're breaking the illusion that peace comes from others. And in doing so, you're rising, calm, disciplined, unshaken. Stay with me, my friends, because what comes next goes even deeper. When the ego has been cracked, when the mirror has been held up, something else begins to grow inside them. Curiosity. The kind of curiosity that keeps them up at night, scrolling, watching, wondering. And that curiosity, as you'll see, is the beginning of their unraveling. And you'll want to hear every word of it. Number 4, curiosity turns into restlessness. The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. My friends, let's break this down. Curiosity is a powerful force. It's the itch that won't go away, the whisper in the back of the mind that grows louder with time. And when you chose silence, when you stopped reacting, when you refused to give them the predictable responses they were waiting for, you awakened something in them they didn't expect: curiosity. At first, it was just a flicker, a passing thought. But the longer your silence lasted, the more that curiosity grew teeth. And when curiosity is left unanswered, it transforms into restlessness. Picture this. They're scrolling through their phone at night, casually checking their notifications. Usually, your name would be there. A text, a like, a reaction, something. But tonight, it's quiet. No sign of you. They shrug it off. He's just busy. But then tomorrow comes, and again, nothing. Days pass, still nothing. That flicker of curiosity, what's he doing, turns into, why hasn't he said anything? And before they know it, their calm has been replaced by unease. That's the thing about silence, folks. It doesn't just speak, it echoes. And that echo follows them everywhere. When they check your profile and don't see a post, the echo grows louder. When they check their messages and your name isn't there, the echo shakes them. Why isn't he reacting? Why doesn't he chase like before? What's he thinking? These questions turn into loops, and those loops keep them restless, because nothing is more unsettling than realizing you no longer control the script. You see, people thrive on patterns. They love predictability because it reassures them. They knew your old pattern: react, respond, reach out. But you broke that cycle. You chose calm, you chose peace, and in that break they lost their certainty. Now they're restless, not because of what you did, but because of what you didn't do. And that's the brilliance of silence. It makes them feel your absence stronger than they ever felt your presence. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Your silence forced them to listen, not to you, but to themselves. And what they heard wasn't peace. It was fear. Fear that you'd moved on. Fear that they'd lost their grip. Fear that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as important to you as they thought. And that fear didn't let them rest. Think about it this way. Curiosity is like an open door in their mind. They can't close it because they don't have the answer. And every time they walk past that door, it calls to them. What's he doing? Who's he with? Why hasn't he reached out? They peek in, but silence greets them. And silence, my friends, is an answer they can't decode. It leaves them pacing the halls of their own mind, restless and unsettled. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine a gambler who always wins a small prize when they pull the lever on a slot machine. It's predictable. It feeds their confidence. But suddenly, one day, they pull the lever and nothing. They try again, nothing, again, nothing. Now the machine that once made them feel secure is driving them insane because they don't know when or if it will respond again. That's what your silence did. It turned certainty into chaos, and chaos into restlessness. And here's the beautiful part. You didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't need to post cryptic messages. You didn't need to fake happiness online. You didn't need to hint at your growth. You simply went silent. And that silence worked harder than any words could, because words can be dismissed, twisted, explained away. But silence leaves nothing to twist. Silence leaves them alone with their own thoughts. And sometimes their thoughts are their worst enemy. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And when you went silent, you disrupted their thoughts. You interrupted the comfort they once had. And instead of happiness, what began to grow in their mind was doubt. Doubt that you still cared. Doubt that you would return. Doubt that they even knew who you really were. And doubt, my friends, is exhausting. It doesn't let them sleep easy. It doesn't let them relax. It makes them restless. But why is this so powerful? Because restlessness isn't just mental, it's emotional. It starts small, checking your stories, scanning your posts, waiting for a notification. But when the silence continues, the restlessness spreads. They start to notice your absence in places they never expected. At dinner with friends, they remember how you used to text them at that time. While scrolling at night, they remember how you used to check in. Silence doesn't just take away your words, it removes their comfort. And when comfort is gone, restlessness moves in. And let's be honest, folks, this wasn't easy for you either. Staying silent when every part of you wants to break it is one of the hardest things a man can do, but it's also one of the strongest, because silence isn't about controlling them, it's about controlling yourself. It's about saying, I don't need to explain myself, I don't need to prove myself. I know my worth and my peace comes first. That's the discipline that separates the strong from the weak. Now here's where the lie gets broken. They'll tell themselves, and maybe even others, that your silence means you've given up, that you don't care, that you're weak. But the truth is, silence is never weakness. Weakness is chasing validation. Weakness is explaining over and over to someone who refuses to listen. Strength is walking away without a fight. Strength is letting silence do the speaking. And deep down, they know it. That's why it eats at them. Think of silence like a seed. At first it's invisible, but with every passing day it grows in the soil of their mind. It pushes roots into their thoughts, branches into their emotions. And before they know it, curiosity has turned into obsession, and obsession has turned into regret. That's how restlessness is born. Not overnight, but slowly, steadily, relentlessly. So here's what I want you to understand. Your silence isn't just making them wonder, it's making them restless. It's turning their confidence into doubt, their control into fear, their comfort into chaos. And all because you chose not to react. That's the power of discipline. That's the power of stoicism. That's the power of a man who knows his worth. So declare it with me. Write it in the comments. Let it echo in your mind. Let it be seen by others. Let it become your truth. My silence creates peace. Because while your silence may drive them restless, for you, it creates calm. It creates strength. It creates a future where you don't need to be loud to be powerful. Stay with me, my friends, because this is only the beginning. The restlessness you've stirred doesn't stop here. When distractions fail, when their ego cracks, when the silence keeps echoing, something deeper begins to creep in: regret. And trust me, regret is the one weight they can't outrun. You won't want to miss what comes next. Number 5. Distractions stop working. Noise is a defense against silence, but silence always wins in the end. My friends, let's be real. When people don't want to face themselves, they run to distraction. They drown themselves in noise, in friends, in endless scrolling, in late nights filled with laughter that doesn't quite feel real. They convince themselves that if they just stay busy enough, if they just fill the silence with activity, they won't have to hear the echo of what they lost. And that's exactly what they tried to do when your silence fell over them. At first it seemed to work. They filled their calendar with plans. They went out more, posted more, laughed louder, showed the world they were fine. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like they had moved on easily. But here's the truth. It was all a cover. Because distractions might numb the noise for a while, but they can't erase the echo of silence. And your silence, steady and unshaken, became that echo they couldn't escape. Imagine this. They're at a crowded party, music blasting, conversations swirling, drinks flowing. On the surface, it looks like fun. But then, for just a split second, in the middle of all that noise, they feel it. The emptiness. The thought of you slips into their mind. the memory of your calm presence, your steady energy. And suddenly the laughter feels hollow, the music feels too loud, and the noise that once distracted them only makes the silence inside feel louder. That's the paradox. The more noise they created, the more your silence exposed itself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." And that's exactly why they struggled. Because instead of retreating inward, instead of facing themselves, they ran outward. They tried to drown the silence with distractions, but the problem is that silence isn't outside, it's within. You can't outrun it, and the more they tried, the more restless they became. Think of it like trying to sleep with a dripping faucet in the next room. You turn up the TV, you play music, you bury your head under the pillow. For a while, it works, but eventually, the drip cuts through the noise. That's your silence. No matter how much they tried to drown it, it kept dripping into their mind, drop by drop, until it drove them crazy. Here's where the lie gets broken. They thought distractions would prove they didn't care. They thought if they looked unbothered enough, if they laughed hard enough, they could fool both you and themselves. But the truth? Distractions don't heal. They only delay, and every distraction eventually fades. The friends go home, the parties end, the phone battery dies, and when the noise stops, they're left alone with the one thing they were trying to escape, the echo of your absence. Seneca said, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." And your silence forced them into that suffering. Because while the event was simple, you chose peace, you chose stillness. Their judgment of it tore them apart. Why isn't he reaching out? Why doesn't he care like before? Did I lose someone who actually mattered? Those questions filled the quiet moments, and no distraction could erase them. And let's not pretend this was easy for you, because while they ran from the silence, you sat with it. You felt it, faced it, owned it. That takes strength. That takes courage. Most people fill their own silence with noise too, posting, explaining, hinting, trying to get attention. But you didn't. You practiced restraint. You practiced discipline. And that's what made your silence powerful. It wasn't avoidance. It was ownership. And ownership, my friends, can't be faked. Let me give you another metaphor. Imagine a person floating in deep water, panicking, thrashing around, exhausting themselves. That's them, trying to distract themselves from the silence. But now imagine another person floating in the same water, calm, still, breathing deeply, conserving energy. That's you. And eventually, the panicked swimmer looks over and realizes the calm one is the one who will survive. That's the effect of your silence. It showed the contrast between chaos and composure. And that contrast made their noise look empty. They started to notice it in subtle ways. The friends who once made them laugh didn't make them feel understood. The nights out felt more exhausting than fun. The social media posts they crafted to look unbothered felt hollow, because no matter how many filters they used, no matter how many smiles they forced, the silence was still there. It sat beneath the surface, humming, reminding them of what they lost. And here's the irony. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought silence meant you didn't have the courage to speak up. But in reality, your silence was the strongest move you could have made. It wasn't passive. It was intentional. It was you saying, "I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to fight for someone's attention. My peace is more valuable than their validation." And the longer you stayed silent, the clearer that message became, not just to them, but to yourself. Rumi said, "Raise your words, not voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And in this case, your silence was the rain. It watered seeds of doubt, seeds of curiosity, seeds of regret inside their mind. Thunder, the noise, the arguments, the chasing, would have only fed their ego. But silence bypassed the ego and spoke straight to their soul, and the soul doesn't forget. So let's break it down to the core truth. Distractions stop working because silence isn't absence, it's presence in another form. It's the reminder of what was once steady, once grounding, once unshakable. And when that presence is gone, when it's replaced by stillness, nothing else quite measures up. They can laugh, but the laughter fades. They can post, but the likes mean nothing. They can stay busy, but the moment they're alone, the silence fills the room. And that's when it hits hardest. But here's what I want you to remember, my friends. While they were running from the silence, you were mastering it. You were turning it into your teacher, your shield, your power. That's why the silence drove them restless, but it gave you peace. Because while they avoided themselves, you found yourself. And that's the difference between weakness and strength. So here's your affirmation for this section. Write it in the comments. Let it echo in your mind. Let it be seen by everyone watching. My silence is stronger than noise. Because it is. Your silence doesn't just shake others, it strengthens you. It builds a discipline that no distraction can match. Stay with me, my friends, because this story doesn't end here. Distractions failing is only the beginning. When the noise no longer works, when the laughter fades, when the silence keeps echoing, something heavier begins to creep in: regret. And regret, unlike distractions, doesn't fade with time. It grows, and that's exactly what we'll uncover next. Number 6. Regret creeps in. We often repent more for the silence we kept than for the words we spoke. My friends, regret is a slow poison. It doesn't come crashing in like a storm. It seeps in through the cracks, quietly, relentlessly, when no one else is around to see it. And when you chose silence, when you refused to play the old game, you created the space for regret to grow inside them. At first, they pushed it away. They told themselves stories. He'll come back. He's just upset. This is just a phase. They laughed louder, acted stronger, told their friends they were fine. But deep down, something was stirring, something they couldn't shake. That something was regret. Picture this. Late at night, when the lights are off and the distractions fade, they reach for their phone out of habit. Normally, your name would be there, checking in, apologizing, asking how their day was. But this time, nothing. Again and again, they refresh, hoping for a message that doesn't come. That's when the questions they tried so hard to avoid start bubbling up. Did I push too far? Was I wrong about him? Did I take him for granted? These aren't easy questions to face, and they only come when silence leaves no room to hide. At first, they fight the feeling. Pride is their shield. Pride tells them, I don't miss him. He didn't matter that much. I'm better off. But pride is fragile, my friends. Pride might cover the surface, but regret seeps underneath. It doesn't need permission. It finds the cracks, and it grows there. Like water leaking into stone, regret slowly reshapes their mind until they can't ignore it anymore. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And that's exactly what your silence did. You didn't lash out. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't even try to prove your side. You simply became unlike the noise, unlike the chaos, unlike the bitterness. And in doing so, you gave them nothing to push against, only themselves. That's when regret hits hardest, because it's not about you throwing it in their face. It's about them realizing it on their own. Think about a gambler who keeps playing, convinced the next hand will fix everything. They lose again and again, but they keep telling themselves the win is coming. Eventually, when their pockets are empty and the game is over, they sit in silence and realize what they've lost. That's regret. Not the loss itself, but the moment of clarity after the loss. And that's what your silence forced on them. Here's the brutal truth. Regret doesn't arrive when they're out partying, posting, or pretending. Regret comes when the noise fades. Regret shows up when they remember your steadiness, your patience, your consistency. Regret whispers, "He was different." Regret asks, "Did I mistake silence for weakness when it was really strength?" Regret wonders, "Why didn't I value him when I had him?" And those whispers, my friends, get louder with time. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And regret makes them realize just how much they wasted. They wasted your attention. They wasted your loyalty. They wasted the comfort of knowing someone cared without needing to be asked. And now, in the silence, they can't escape that truth. But here's what makes regret so heavy. To admit it, they'd have to drop their pride. To admit it, they'd have to face themselves fully. And that's something most people can't do. So they stay quiet. They keep pretending. They act unbothered while regret eats at them from the inside. And the more they pretend, the heavier the regret becomes. Because silence doesn't just show them what they lost, it shows them who they became in the process. Someone careless, someone prideful, someone who let go of a man who walked away with dignity. Imagine this. They replay the last conversation in their mind. They remember their words, maybe sharp, maybe careless. And then they realize you never responded with the same energy. You didn't curse them out. You didn't beg. You didn't break. You simply stepped back, silent, calm, composed. That realization is a dagger because it shows them the contrast, their chaos versus your calm, their noise versus your discipline, their pride versus your peace. And when that contrast becomes clear, regret is unavoidable. Here's where the lies unravel. They told themselves you'd always be there. They told themselves you'd eventually chase. They told themselves silence meant indifference. But each passing day without your reaction broke those lies apart. And in their place, regret stood tall. Because silence doesn't lie. Silence doesn't bend. Silence just is. And in that truth, they saw what they didn't want to see. You were stronger than they thought. Strong enough to walk away. Strong enough not to look back. And let's be real here, my friends. This wasn't easy for you. Regret isn't only their battle. You probably wondered too. You probably felt the urge to reach out, to prove your side, to make sure they knew your worth. But you didn't. You resisted. You chose discipline. You chose peace. And that choice not only created their regret, it created your growth. Because regret only lingers when you keep looking back. And you stopped looking back. You looked forward. That's the difference. Think of it like planting a garden. If you keep watering weeds, they'll keep growing. But when you stop, the weeds die, and space opens up for real growth. Their regret is the weeds. They keep watering it with pride, with denial, with distractions. But you pulled your energy back, and in doing so, you created space for something better to grow. That's why you feel stronger, calmer, lighter. And that's why they feel restless, heavy, regretful. So let's break it down. Regret creeps in not because you punished them, not because you played games, but because you showed them something rare, self-respect. You showed them that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means strength. You showed them that peace isn't something they can take from you, it's something you own. And once they saw that, regret became inevitable. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. You embodied that. You didn't try to change them, you changed yourself. And that choice flipped the power dynamic. They're now the ones stuck in questions, in doubt, in regret, and you're the one walking forward in strength. So let me leave you with this. Regret is their weight to carry, not yours. Don't pick it up. Don't try to fix it. Don't let their pride trick you into chasing again. Let regret do its job. Let silence speak. Let your peace stay unshaken, because that's what truly unsettles them. Not your anger, not your words, but your calm refusal to lose yourself. And here's your affirmation, my friends. Write it in the comments. Show it to yourself. Show it to the world. I don't chase regret. I choose peace because that's the truth. You're not here to carry their burden. You're here to live in clarity, in calm, in strength. Stay with me, because regret is just the beginning. Once regret sets in, it creates an even deeper storm, uncertainty. They start to wonder not just what they lost, but who you've become without them. And that mystery, that unreadable calm, will drive them further than regret ever could. And trust me, my friends, you'll want to hear that part next. Number 7, the mystery of your peace. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Marcus Aurelius. My friends, peace is a rare thing in a noisy world. Most people live in chaos, reacting to every text, every post, every shift in attention. Their emotions are like a leaf tossed around by the wind, never grounded, never steady. But then there's you. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You didn't try to prove anything. You chose silence. And in that silence, you carried something most people can't understand: peace. That peace became a mystery so strong it unsettled them more than any words ever could. At first, they thought they had you figured out. They expected you to fold, to break, to lash out. They thought you'd show your pain in subtle ways, maybe through a late-night post, maybe through a song lyric, maybe through a message that screamed, "I'm still hurting." But none of that came. Instead, you became unreadable. And in that unreadability, you became unforgettable. Because nothing is more haunting to someone than not knowing where they stand with you anymore. Imagine a chess game. One player makes their moves quickly, confidently, expecting the opponent to react the same way as always, but suddenly the opponent stops rushing. They sit in silence, calm, deliberate, studying the board. Every second of stillness makes the other player more nervous, not because of the move itself, but because of the mystery behind it. That's your silence. You became the calm strategist in the middle of chaos. And that calm drove them crazy. They started to ask questions they never asked before. How is he so calm? Why isn't he showing me what he feels? What's he doing that he doesn't need me anymore? Those questions didn't stop at the surface. They dug deeper. They wondered if you were suffering in silence or if you had already healed. They wondered if you were sitting in pain or if you had built a new life without them. And because you gave them no clues, every answer they came up with only unsettled them more. That's the power of mystery. Curiosity can be brushed off, but mystery lingers. Curiosity fades with answers, but mystery grows in the absence of them. And when you embody peace, when you move with discipline, when you refuse to broadcast your emotions, you become the mystery they can't solve, and that mystery keeps them restless. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free," and your peace was bravery, it was freedom. You weren't bound by their expectations anymore. You weren't tied to their validation. You were free from the chains of reaction. And freedom, my friends, is what truly scares those who tried to control you. Because when you can't be controlled, you become unpredictable. And when you're unpredictable, you become powerful. Think of a storm. Most people announce their pain like thunder, loud, dramatic, demanding attention. But you You were like the mountain in the middle of it all, still, steady, silent, and when the storm passed, you were still standing. That image haunted them because they expected you to collapse. They expected you to crumble. Instead, you rose higher in silence than you ever did in noise. And here's the truth. Peace is not passive. Peace is not indifference. Peace is not weakness. Peace is the result of mastery. Mastery over your emotions, mastery over your impulses, mastery over the need to be understood. And when they saw that in you, they couldn't process it. Because most people never meet someone who can stay calm in the face of chaos. Most people never meet someone who can choose peace over pride. That made you rare, and rarity is unforgettable. But let's be real here. Carrying that peace wasn't easy. It meant holding your ground when your ego screamed to react. It meant resisting the urge to send that message, to check in, to prove your side. It meant letting go of the outcome and anchoring yourself in your own worth. That's not weakness, my friends. That's the highest form of strength. And in choosing that path, you didn't just change how they saw you. You changed how you saw yourself. Now let's break the lies. They thought silence meant you were lost. They thought peace meant you didn't care. They thought calm meant weakness. But the truth is, your peace was your evolution. Your calm was your courage. Your silence wasn't empty. It was full of self-respect, discipline, and clarity. And that truth shook them because it revealed something they didn't want to face. You no longer needed them to feel whole. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best answer to anger is silence." And you lived that truth. You didn't fight their chaos with chaos. You didn't feed their ego with attention. You didn't beg for clarity from someone who thrived in confusion. You answered with silence, and that silence became louder than any words could have been. So what did they feel? Regret, yes. Curiosity, yes. But more than that, they felt the weight of mystery. And mystery, when tied to peace, is the most addictive force in the world, because people can move on from anger, they can justify bitterness, but they can't stop thinking about the calm they can't understand. They can't forget the man who didn't play by the rules, who didn't flinch, who didn't lose himself. And that's exactly who you became. So here's the motivational truth I want you to carry, my friends. Your peace is not for sale. Your calm is your crown, and your silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Never let anyone convince you otherwise, because when you embody peace, you win twice. You free yourself, and you leave them restless, searching for answers they'll never find. And here's your final affirmation for today. Write it in the comments. Let it echo in your heart. Let the world see it. My peace is my power. Because it is, it always has been, and it always will be. If this message struck something deep inside you today, if it reminded you of your worth and the power of silence, take a moment right now. Press that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Stay with me, because every video we create together sharpens that stoic edge in you, turning silence into strength and peace into power. I'll see you in the next one, my friends.